David wasn't a monster in the traditional sense. He was a man trapped in his own prison of expectations, a corporate manager who brought the same rigid efficiency he used in board meetings to his home life. For 26 years, he had molded Sarah into what he thought she should be: dutiful, compliant, always striving to earn his approval. But Sarah had committed the ultimate sin in David's eyes. She had refused to continue financing his lifestyle. You see, for the past 3 years, Sarah had been working 2 jobs. By day, she was a graphic designer at a small firm. By night, she waited tables at an upscale restaurant. Every paycheck, she handed over 80% to her father, who claimed it was for household expenses. What Sarah didn't know was that David had been gambling, not on horses or cards, but on risky stock investments, trying to make a quick fortune to maintain the facade of success he presented to their neighbors. The morning of the confrontation, Sarah had finally gathered the courage to say no. "Dad, I need to save for my own apartment. I can't keep giving you all my money." Those words, simple, reasonable, adult words, triggered something primal in David. In his mind, children were investments that should provide returns. And if Sarah wasn't going to pay dividends, she had no value to him. Can you see it? The way his face turns red, not from shame but from anger? The way his fists clench, not to strike but to control the rage building inside him? This is the moment when love reveals its conditions, when a parent's care shows its price tag. If you're not contributing to this household, then you don't belong in this household, David said, his voice carrying the same tone he used to fire underperforming employees. "Pack your things. I want you out by tonight." Sarah's mother, Linda, stood in the doorway of the kitchen, her coffee mug frozen halfway to her lips. Years of living with David had taught her when to speak and when to remain silent. This was a moment for silence. She had learned long ago that defending her daughter only made things worse for both of them. Feel Sarah's mother's internal struggle, the way love gets buried under layers of fear and habit, the way some people become ghosts in their own homes, watching from the sidelines as their family implodes. Sarah didn't cry in front of them. She had learned early that tears only fueled her father's sense of power. Instead, she nodded, went to her room, and began packing. Each item she folded, the sweater her grandmother had knitted, the dress she wore to her college graduation, carried the weight of memories that no longer belonged in this house. But here's where our story takes its first turn toward the extraordinary. As Sarah packed, her phone buzzed with a text from her lawyer. Yes, she had a lawyer, though her family didn't. "Know this." The message read, "Estate settlement complete. All documents signed. You may begin accessing your inheritance immediately." 3 months earlier, Sarah's godmother, Margaret, had passed away. Margaret was her mother's best friend from college, a woman who had never married, never had children, but had watched Sarah grow up from a distance. Every birthday, every Christmas, Margaret would send thoughtful gifts and handwritten letters. In the notes, she'd often say, "Save this for when you're ready to spread your wings." Sarah had always assumed Margaret meant it metaphorically. She was wrong. Imagine the moment of revelation. Picture opening an envelope expecting a $5 gift card and finding the deed to a mansion instead. Feel the vertigo of having your entire reality shift in the space of a single breath. The inheritance was staggering. A luxury apartment in the city's most exclusive district, plus a bank account with enough money to live comfortably for decades without working. Margaret had been quietly wealthy, having inherited family money and invested wisely over the years. But she had lived modestly, putting her fortune aside for the daughter she never had. Sarah. Margaret had died knowing something that Sarah hadn't yet realized. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the power to walk away from those who don't value them. That night, as Sarah sat in a cheap motel room with everything she owned packed into 3 suitcases, she didn't cry. Instead, she made a decision that would change everything. She would accept Margaret's gift, but she would do so in complete silence. Her family would never know about the inheritance, never know how she survived after being cast out. They would have to live with their choices without the comfort of knowing she was okay. Can you feel the power in that decision? The way silence can be more devastating than any scream? The way mystery creates more torture than facts? The next morning, Sarah called a moving company. Not just any moving company, the most expensive one in the city, known for handling relocations of senators and tech CEOs. She scheduled them to collect the few items she'd left at her father's house while he was at work. The apartment Margaret left her was on the 38th floor of a building that looked like a vertical garden, with terraces spilling over with greenery. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of the city that made you feel like you were floating above everyone's problems. The doorman wore white gloves and knew everyone's names. The lobby smelled like fresh orchids and wealth. Sarah spent her first week in her new home doing nothing but existing in the space. She'd wake up to sunlight streaming through walls of glass, make coffee in a kitchen that was larger than her bedroom at her father's house, and sit on the terrace, watching the city wake up 38 floors below. Feel that freedom. The way space changes you when you've lived cramped for so long. The way silence becomes a luxury when you've been surrounded by judgment and demands. She didn't post on social media. She didn't update her address with anyone except her employer. And even then, she used a P.O. box. Sarah understood that revenge isn't always about action. Sometimes it's about absence. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do to someone is to remove yourself so completely that they have to confront the space you used to fill. Weeks passed, then months. Sarah established a routine that felt like meditation after years of chaos. She'd work on freelance design projects, tend to a small herb garden on her terrace, and spend evenings reading in a bathtub so deep it could double as a small pool. She discovered that luxury, when you haven't been raised with it, feels less like indulgence and more like breathing for the first time. Meanwhile, in her father's house, the absence was noticed. The bills that Sarah used to pay with her waitressing, tips began arriving with more urgency. David found himself calculating expenses he hadn't thought about in years. The cable, the upgraded internet, the quarterly maintenance on the pool, costs that had been absorbed by his daughter's generosity. David's growing awareness, the way entitlement blinds you to contributions until they're gone, the way we only measure water when the well runs dry. Linda, Sarah's mother, noticed different things. The house felt too quiet without Sarah's late-night returns from her restaurant shifts. The refrigerator, once stocked with groceries Sarah bought, now held only David's preferred items. Expensive steaks he'd grill on weekends and imported beer he'd drink while watching financial news. One evening, Linda tried to bring up Sarah in conversation. "Have you heard from her?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. David's response was immediate and sharp. "She made her choice. She'll come crawling back when she realizes how good she had it here." But Sarah didn't come crawling back. She was too busy learning to fly. Visualization exercise. Close your eyes and see Sarah in her new life. Watch her wake up in a bed that faces east, greeting the sun like an old friend. See her moving through spaces that are hers alone, touching walls she owns, opening refrigerators she's filled with foods she chooses. This is what healing looks like when you choose yourself. 4 months after being cast out, Sarah made her first strategic move in what she was beginning to think of as the silent war. She hired a local photographer, one who specialized in architectural and lifestyle photography. Together, they created a portfolio of her apartment, the morning light streaming through the windows, the curated art on the walls, the view from the terrace at sunset. But Sarah didn't post these photos anywhere David might see them. Instead, she submitted them to an upscale design magazine that featured luxury living spaces. The photos were published in a 6-page spread titled Urban Oasis, When Less is More in Elite Living. The magazine hit newsstands just as Sarah was making her second move. She reached out to the building's concierge, a man named James who had been there for 15 years and knew everyone worth knowing in the building, and mentioned casually that her father, David, was a corporate manager at a company called Meridian Solutions. "Oh," James said, his eyebrows raising slightly. "We actually manage several properties for Meridian executives. In fact, we have a few units available for their corporate housing program. I believe your father's company was requesting options in this building just last month." Sarah's smile was like winter sunlight, beautiful but cold. "How interesting. Please, if he ever comes by to tour units, make sure he knows I'm a resident here. Unit 3812. Feel the precision of this move. The way she's not just surviving but strategizing. The way she's rewriting the narrative from victim to victor without raising her voice or lifting a finger." 2 weeks later, David received a call from his company's human resources department. They were organizing a housing tour for incoming senior executives, and as part of it, they were viewing luxury apartments that might be suitable for corporate housing. The building on the list was one of the most prestigious in the city, the same building where, unknown to David, his daughter now lived. David agreed to join the tour, partly because it was good for his image, and partly because he loved associating with the kind of wealth these apartments represented. He put on his best suit, practiced his executive presence in the mirror, and arrived at the building with 6 other managers. The tour was led by James, the concierge, who guided them through common areas first: the 24-hour fitness center with personal trainers on call, the business center with private conference rooms, the residence lounge with a wine cellar that would make collectors weep. "And now," James announced as they approached the elevator, "I'd like to show you one of our premier units, but first I should mention something interesting. We actually have a resident here who I believe works at Meridian Solutions." David's attention sharpened. Someone from his company already lived here? James continued, "Sarah Thompson. She's in 3812. Lovely young woman. Graphic designer, I believe." The elevator seemed to tilt slightly. David's breath caught, but he maintained his professional expression. Thompson. His daughter had taken her mother's maiden name. When had this happened? Feel that moment of cognitive dissonance. The way reality starts to rearrange itself when what you thought you knew reveals itself to be incomplete. The way the ground shifts beneath your feet when you realize you've been standing on assumptions. The elevator rose in expensive silence. 38th floor. David's mind raced through impossible calculations. The monthly fees for a unit on this floor started at $8,000. How could Sarah afford this? Did she take out massive loans? Was she in debt? Was she sharing the space with someone? Or worse, living with someone who was supporting her? But as the elevator climbed, David's arrogance began to assert itself over his confusion. This had to be a misunderstanding. Perhaps Sarah was house-sitting, or maybe this James person was confused, mixing up residents. There was no way his daughter, the same daughter he'd thrown out for not contributing enough to his household expenses, was living in luxury while he was still calculating how to maintain his own lifestyle. The unit they toured was 3 floors below Sarah's, but it was identical in layout. As David walked through the sun-drenched rooms, touching marble countertops and standing on heated bathroom floors, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking through a dream someone else was having. After the tour, as the group gathered in the lobby to discuss options, David lingered behind. He approached James with the casual authority he used when extracting information from subordinates. "This resident you mentioned, Sarah Thompson. Are you certain she works at Meridian?" James consulted his discreetly maintained notes. "Yes, sir. Though I believe she works freelance now. She mentioned leaving her position at a smaller firm several months ago. She's quite settled here, though. Paid the entire year up front, if I'm not mistaken." The floor seemed to tilt again. Paid up front? For a year? In this building? Is she available? I mean, as a representative of Meridian, it might be useful to connect with her, see how she's finding the living accommodations. James's professional expression didn't change, but something in his eyes suggested he was enjoying this conversation more than he was letting on. "I can certainly inquire, Mr. David Maxwell." "Ah, yes. Mr. Maxwell, I'll be happy to pass along your information to Ms. Thompson, though I should mention she's quite private, a quality we greatly value in our residents." Hear the subtext in these words. The way James is protecting Sarah, while simultaneously feeding David information that will unravel him. This is how silent victories are orchestrated, with politeness, precision, and the patience of someone who knows the truth always surfaces eventually. That night, David couldn't sleep. He lay next to Linda, who was lost in her own dreams, and tried to piece together a puzzle that didn't fit his understanding of their daughter. Sarah had always lived within his rules, contributed to his household, accepted his decisions. How had she suddenly become someone who could afford luxury apartments? He considered calling her, but realized he didn't have her new phone number. He'd deleted her contact information the day he told her to leave, a gesture meant to emphasize his commitment to the decision. Now, that same gesture trapped him in uncertainty. The next morning, David did something he hadn't done in months. He asked Linda about their daughter. "Have you heard from Sarah?" Linda looked up from her breakfast, plain toast and black coffee, a far cry from the elaborate breakfast Sarah used to prepare for them. "No. Have you?" "I ran into someone yesterday who mentioned seeing her in the city, at some fancy building." Linda's interest sharpened. For months, she'd been carrying the guilt of not defending Sarah that morning. In her quiet moments, away from David's influence, she found herself wondering how her daughter was surviving. Did they say how she was? They said she looked well, that she was unsettled. Feel Linda's relief, mixed with a strange sort of pride. Feel her beginning to ask questions she'd been afraid to voice. Feel the slow awakening of a mother who had been dormant too long. Over the following weeks, David couldn't let go of his questions. He began researching Sarah in ways he hadn't since she was 16, and he was worried about her online activity. He discovered she'd legally changed her last name 3 months ago. He found that she'd terminated her lease on the small apartment she'd shared with 2 roommates, an apartment he hadn't even known existed. What he couldn't find was how she was paying for her new life. Sarah had become what he had always insisted she be, independent. But in becoming independent, she had also become mysterious, and mystery was something David couldn't control. This is where the power dynamic shifts. Watch carefully as the parent who demanded independence from his child confronts what real independence looks like: complete autonomy, including the autonomy to exclude him from her life. 2 months passed before David made his next move. Unable to contain his curiosity any longer, and armed with Sarah's new address, obtained through a private investigator he hired, he decided to visit. Not to reconcile. He hadn't yet admitted that throwing her out was a mistake, but to satisfy his need to understand how she had managed this transformation. He chose a Saturday afternoon, when he knew most people were home. He didn't call ahead. The element of surprise had always been one of his tools for maintaining control. If Sarah was living beyond her means, caught off guard, she would reveal the truth. The building's lobby was intimidating up close. David, despite his corporate confidence, felt underdressed in his weekend casual wear. James, the concierge, recognized him immediately. "Mr. Maxwell, how nice to see you again. Are you here to see Ms. Thompson?" "I am. Is she available?" James pressed a button on his discreetly placed intercom. "Ms. Thompson, you have a visitor in the lobby, Mr. David Maxwell." The pause that followed felt like eternity. Then, Sarah's voice, crystal clear and perfectly composed. "Thank you, James. Please send him up." Feel this moment from multiple perspectives. Feel David's surprise that she didn't refuse to see him. Feel James's satisfaction in facilitating this reunion. Feel Sarah's calm acceptance. the centeredness that comes from knowing you own your space entirely. The elevator ride to the 38th floor gave David time to notice details he'd missed during the corporate tour. The elevator itself was a work of art, mahogany and brass, with a small crystal chandelier. Each floor button was engraved. The subtle scent of expensive perfume lingered from previous passengers. This wasn't just luxury. This was rarefied air. When the elevator opened, Sarah was waiting in her doorway, but this wasn't the Sarah who had left his house 6 months ago. This woman was wearing a cashmere cardigan over perfectly fitted jeans. Her hair, once always tied back in hasty ponytails, fell in glossy waves around her shoulders. But it was her expression that struck him most. Serene, untroubled, like someone who had finally stopped running and could afford to wait for whatever came next. "Hello, Dad," she said, her voice carrying neither warmth nor hostility. It was the tone a professional uses when greeting a client, polite, distant, businesslike. Sarah. David stepped into the apartment, and his world shifted again. The space was vast, yes, but what undid him was how completely it belonged to her. Every piece of furniture, every book on the shelves, every plant carefully placed by the windows, all of it spoke of time, thought, and resources he couldn't fathom. See through David's eyes now. Watch his carefully constructed understanding of his daughter disintegrate as he moves through spaces that announce wealth and independence. Feel his growing discomfort as he realizes he doesn't know this woman at all. "Would you like coffee?" Sarah asked, gesturing toward a seating area that faced floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. "I have some excellent Ethiopian blend, or there's a French roast if you prefer something stronger." David nodded mutely, accepting the coffee more as an anchor to familiarity than from thirst. He watched as Sarah moved through her kitchen with the fluid confidence of someone in their own domain. The coffee machine alone probably cost more than his monthly car payment. When she returned with 2 perfectly prepared cups and small plates of artisanal pastries, David couldn't hold back any longer. "Sarah, I need to understand. How is this possible? The last time we spoke, you were working 2 jobs just to contribute to household expenses. Now you're living in..." He gestured helplessly at the apartment around them. Sarah sat across from him, her posture elegant and relaxed. She took a sip of her coffee before responding. "Life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it? Sometimes, what we think we know about our circumstances is completely different from reality. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I'm prepared to give right now. Feel the power reversal. Feel David encountering boundaries he can't cross, questions he can't demand answers to. Feel Sarah exercising a type of control he never taught her, but she's mastered completely." David set down his coffee cup with more force than necessary. "Sarah, I'm your father. I have a right to know what's happening in your life." Something flickered in Sarah's eyes. Not anger, but something colder. "A father's rights are earned, not claimed. They come with responsibilities, with presence, with care. You gave up those rights when you told me there was no place for me in your home. I didn't mean permanently. You were being unreasonable about the money, and I needed to teach you about responsibility." Sarah's laugh was soft, but sharp. "Responsibility? Dad, I've been responsible since I was 14 and started working to help with bills. I've been responsible every time I handed you my paychecks. I've been responsible every time I bit my tongue when you said something cruel because keeping peace was easier than confronting you. The only thing I wasn't responsible for was my own happiness. Until now." Feel these words landing like gentle arrows. Feel the precision with which Sarah dismantles her father's justifications. Feel the calm devastation of truth spoken without rage, but with perfect clarity. David shifted in his seat, searching for the moral high ground he usually occupied in family discussions. "We didn't raise you to be ungrateful. Everything we did was for your benefit. Did you? Even when you told me I was worthless? Even when you compared me to other people's children? Even when you made me feel like I had to earn love through payments and compliance? She stood, walking to the window, her silhouette framed by the cityscape beyond. I spent 26 years trying to be enough for you. Enough contribution, enough obedience, enough sacrifice. It was never enough because you were looking for something I couldn't give you. Validation for your own choices, your own life, your own unfulfilled dreams. David felt something he rarely experienced, the recognition of truth he didn't want to acknowledge. But instead of introspection, he defaulted to his usual defensive mode. So this is about blame. You're living in luxury just to prove a point? Sarah turned back to face him, and for a moment, he saw not his daughter, but the woman she had become, someone complete unto herself. Dad, this isn't about you at all. This is about me discovering that my worth was never attached to your approval. That my value existed independently of your recognition. That my life could be abundant without your permission.